Pearl Harbor, January 18th, 1944, 2:45 a.m. The fluorescent lights in Strategy Room C flickered like dying fireflies. 9 admirals sat in leather chairs worn smooth by years of war planning. Maps covered every wall. The Pacific Ocean, rendered in blues and greens, stretched across 20 feet of plaster. Red pins marked Japanese strongholds, blue pins marked American positions. Between them, nothing but water and mathematics. Ezra Calloway stood at the head of the conference table. 18 years old, 3 months past his birthday, hands shaking so hard the map he held rattled like autumn leaves. His uniform didn't fit right. The sleeves were too long. His mother had left when he was 9. His father died in a mine collapse when he was 12. No one taught him how to wear a Navy uniform properly. His voice carried the mountains of West Virginia, Appalachia thick in every syllable. "Sirs, I got away to save 500,000 American boys." The admirals stared. One checked his watch, another lit a cigarette. The smoke curled toward the ceiling in lazy spirals. Ezra swallowed. His throat was dry as coal dust. "By not fighting..." The silence lasted exactly 4 seconds. Admiral Ernest King slammed his palm on the mahogany table. The sound cracked through the room like a rifle shot. Coffee cups jumped. Ashtrays scattered. "Who the hell let this hillbilly kid in here?" King's face was red. Veins stood out on his neck like rope. He pointed at the door with a finger, thick as a railroad spike. "Get him out, now, before I have him court-martialed for wasting our time." 2 Marine guards stepped forward. Their boots echoed on the tile floor. Ezra looked at Commander Nathaniel Booth, the man who'd brought him here. Booth sat 3 chairs down from King. His face was pale. He wouldn't meet Ezra's eyes. The door closed behind Ezra at 2:49 a.m. The hallway was empty. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead. Ezra stood there for a long time. His hands had stopped shaking. That surprised him. He thought they'd shake forever. He walked back to his desk. 3rd floor, Office of Naval Intelligence, File Room 7. His desk was smaller than the others, pushed into a corner near the radiator that clanked and hissed, but never got warm. He sat down, pulled out the yellow notepad from his footlocker. The one with his calculations, 4 pages of numbers written in pencil. He'd used a ruler to keep the columns straight. The numbers didn't lie. They never had. But numbers couldn't make admirals listen. 6 months earlier, September 1943, Cambridge, Massachusetts. Ezra had never seen buildings that old. MIT's stone halls looked like something from a picture book. He came from Morgantown, West Virginia, where buildings were wood frame or brick, where nothing lasted more than 50 years before the mines undermined the foundations and everything tilted sideways. He'd gotten the scholarship through test scores. The Army had administered IQ tests to everyone registering for the draft. Ezra scored 162, the highest in Monongalia County, the highest anyone could remember in West Virginia. MIT offered him a full ride, tuition, room board, all of it. He arrived September 3rd with 1 suitcase, everything he owned. He wore his grandfather's church suit to his first class. Professor Harlan taught Military Strategy 201. He was 70 years old, white hair, wire-rimmed glasses. He'd advised Pershing in the Great War. Everyone said so. He spoke with the authority of someone who'd never been wrong. On September 29th, Professor Harland presented the Pacific Strategy. "Island by island, sir," he said. "We take each Japanese stronghold in sequence. Tarawa, Rabaul, Truk, the Marianas. It's the only way to secure supply lines to Australia and deny Japan their defensive perimeter." He drew on the blackboard. Lines connecting islands. Arrows pointing west. Numbers estimating casualties. "We anticipate 600,000 to 800,000 American casualties over the next 3 to 4 years. But there's no alternative. We must neutralize every Japanese garrison or risk them cutting our supply routes." Ezra raised his hand. The professor looked annoyed. Yes, Mr. Calloway. Sir, what if we just went around them? The classroom went quiet. 32 students turned to look at Ezra in the back row. He was the youngest in the class, the only one without a trust fund or a father who'd gone to Harvard. Explain, Professor Harland said. Well, sir, if an island needs supplies from somewhere else to survive and we take the somewhere else the island can't function, we don't have to assault it. It just stops mattering. Professor Harland smiled. It wasn't a kind smile. Mr. Calloway, do you think you understand military strategy better than Admiral Nimitz, better than the Joint Chiefs of Staff, better than officers who've studied warfare for decades? No, sir, but the math doesn't care who understands it. The smile disappeared. See me after class. After class, Professor Harland told Ezra that humility was the first requirement of education, that young men from the mountains needed to learn to listen before they spoke, that MIT didn't accept students to hear their uninformed opinions. Professor Harland cut him off. You're not here to question your betters, Mr. Calloway. On October 15th, 1943, Ezra received a letter from the Dean of Students. He was dismissed from MIT for failure to demonstrate appropriate respect for faculty expertise and institutional knowledge. He packed his suitcase, took the train to Boston, then to New York, then to Washington, D.C. He had $17.35. The Navy recruiting station was on Constitution Avenue. The recruiter looked at his IQ test scores, looked at Ezra. You're 17. Yes, sir. Can't put you in combat until you're 18. When's your birthday? February 2nd. 4 months. You can enlist now, but you'll be doing paperwork until February. That acceptable? Yes, sir. Why the Navy? Ezra thought about it. Because I want to do something that matters. The recruiter stamped the forms. Report to Office of Naval Intelligence, Pearl Harbor. They need file clerks. You can read and write, can't you? Yes, sir. Then you're hired. Pearl Harbor, November 8, 1943. Commander Nathaniel Booth was 46 years old, thin as a fence post. He'd taught mathematics at Princeton before the war. Number theory, abstract algebra, things that had no practical application except to prove you were smarter than other people. He ran Intelligence Analysis Section 7, Casualty Projection and Strategic Modeling. He had 12 officers under him. All of them had degrees from good schools. All of them were older than 25. Ezra reported to him at 0800 hours. Booth looked at the file, looked at Ezra. You're 17. Yes, sir. Says here you got kicked out of MIT. Yes, sir. For what? For being right when I should have been quiet, sir. Booth almost smiled. Almost. You'll be filing reports, organizing maps, making coffee, running errands. You will not offer strategic opinions. You will not question senior officers. You will do exactly what you're told when you're told. Clear? Clear, sir? Good. Your desk is in the corner. Don't touch anything on anyone else's desk. Don't read anything marked secret or above. Just file what you're given. Understood? Understood, sir. Ezra's desk was next to a radiator that clanked. The corner was dark. No window. The light overhead flickered. The chair had a broken wheel that made it tilt left. It was perfect, because no one watched what happened in corners. November the 20th through 23rd, 1943, Tarawa Atoll. The casualty reports arrived on November 27th. Someone had to organize them, file them, make them presentable for the senior staff briefing. Commander Booth gave the job to Ezra. Sort by date, then by unit, then by type of casualty. Killed in action, wounded in action, missing in action. Put it in a binder with tabs. I need it by Monday. It was Friday at 4 p.m. Ezra said, yes, sir. He worked through Friday night, through Saturday, through Sunday. The casualty reports from Tarawa covered his desk like snow. Each page was a name, a rank, a serial number, a hometown, a way of dying. Private First Class James Morrison, age 19, Omaha, Nebraska. Killed by machine gun fire while crossing the reef at Red Beach 1. November 20th, 06:22 hours, Corporal Daniel Hayes, age 21, Portland, Oregon, killed by mortar fire near the seawall at Red Beach 2. November 20th, 08:47 hours, Lance Corporal Michael O'Brien, age 20, Boston, Massachusetts, died of wounds aboard USS Sheridan. November 21st, 14:30 hours. The names went on. And on, and on. 696 killed in action, 101 wounded in action, to capture an atoll 2.4 miles long and half a mile wide. Ezra finished the binder Sunday night at 11 p.m., but he couldn't stop reading. He pulled the strategic briefing on Tarawa from the files, the one marked secret that he wasn't supposed to touch. He read it 3 times. The island had 4,690 Japanese defenders. They'd built bunkers from coconut logs and concrete, positioned machine guns to cover every beach, strung barbed wire through the coral. The Americans had bombed Tarawa for 3 days before the assault, fired 3,000 tons of naval artillery. The commanders thought nothing could survive, but the bunkers survived. The Japanese survived, and when the Marines hit the beaches, they died in the water. The tide was wrong. Landing craft stuck on the reef. Men had to wade 700 yards under fire. The water turned red. 1,696 Americans died to kill 4,200 Japanese on an island smaller than a farm. Ezra sat at his desk. It was midnight. The office was empty except for him and the sound of the radiator clanking. He pulled out a yellow notepad, started writing numbers. If Tarawa cost 1,696 killed for 4 square miles, what would the rest of the Pacific cost? He pulled maps from the file cabinets, spread them across the floor, started calculating. Rabaul, 47 square miles, 110,000 Japanese defenders, heavily fortified, 5 airfields. If the casualty ratio held, he did the math 3 times to make sure. 28,000 to 35,000 American casualties, just for Rabaul. Then Truk, 40 square miles, 27,000 defenders, then the Marianas, then the Philippines, then Okinawa, then Japan itself. The numbers climbed. 200,000 casualties, 400,000, 600,000. His hand cramped from writing. He switched to his left hand, kept going. By 3 a.m. he had a number. 680,000 American casualties, give or take 50,000. Over the next 3 to 4 years, 680,000 mothers getting telegrams, 680,000 fathers staring at empty chairs at dinner, 680,000 graves that would never get old. Unless... Ezra looked at the map of Rabaul again, really looked at it. The Japanese had 110,000 troops there. 5 airfields, miles of tunnels, hundreds of artillery pieces. It was the most heavily fortified position in the South Pacific outside of Japan itself. But Rabaul didn't grow food, didn't produce fuel, didn't manufacture ammunition. Everything came by ship. From Truk, 565 nautical miles away, Ezra traced the supply line with his finger. Truk to Rabaul, 565 miles of open ocean. Then he looked at the Admiralty Islands, 118 nautical miles from Rabaul, closer than Truk. What if America took the Admiralty Islands, built an airbase there, used it to cut the shipping route from Truk to Rabaul? Rabaul would be cut off. No supplies, no fuel, no ammunition. 110,000 Japanese troops would just sit there, unable to fight, unable to retreat, unable to do anything except starve. America wouldn't have to invade Rabaul, wouldn't have to lose 35,000 men taking it. Could just leave it, like a castle under siege in medieval times, let the garrison wither. Ezra started calculating again. Faster now. The Admiralty Islands were lightly defended. Intelligence estimated 4,000 Japanese troops, maybe less. The islands weren't strategic themselves, just a stepping stone. If America assaulted the Admiralties instead of Rabaul, he estimated 500 American casualties, maybe 1,000 if things went badly. Savings, 34,000 American lives. For one island, what if they did it everywhere bypass Truk? Bypass WWII, bypass every heavily fortified island. Just take the ones nearby. Cut the supply lines, let the garrisons collapse under their own weight. The numbers got bigger. 100,000 lives saved. 200,000, 400,000. At 4:30 a.m. Ezra made coffee. The office kept a hot plate and instant coffee powder. He mixed it with water from the tap. It tasted like burnt metal and regret. He drank it anyway. At 5:15 a.m. he finished writing. 4 pages on yellow notepaper. His handwriting was cramped and uneven. He didn't know how to type. Never learned. He read it over 3 times, checked every number, made sure every calculation was right. Then he put it on Commander Booth's desk, right in the center. Impossible to miss. He went to the bathroom, splashed water on his face, looked at himself in the mirror. He looked like his grandfather. Same cheekbones, same dark eyes. His grandfather had fixed watches, delicate work, precise. Every gear had to fit exactly, or the whole thing failed. Strategy was like that. One wrong number and the whole plan collapsed. But Ezra's numbers were right. He knew they were. The question was whether anyone would listen. Monday, November the 29th, 1943, 7:05 a.m. Commander Booth arrived at his desk with coffee from the officers' mess. Real coffee. Not instant. It smelled like heaven. He saw the yellow notepad, picked it up, started reading. Ezra watched from his corner desk, pretended to organize files. His hands weren't shaking. That surprised him. He thought they would be. Booth read for 3 minutes. Then he laughed, a short, sharp bark of sound. He walked to Ezra's desk, dropped the notepad on it. Kid thinks he's smarter than Admiral Halsey. Ezra looked up. Sir, I just thought, you're here to file papers, not think. That's above your pay grade. Booth walked back to his desk, crumpled the yellow notepad, threw it in the trash can next to his chair. Get me the November logistics summaries, the ones from Supply Command. I need them in 15 minutes. Yes, sir. Ezra got the summaries, brought them to Booth, went back to his desk. He didn't look at the trash can, didn't think about the 4 pages of calculations sitting in the garbage. Just filed papers, organized maps, did what he was told. At 11:30 p.m. that night, Booth was still in the office, working on a different project. Projected fuel consumption for the next 6 months. Boring, tedious, necessary. He finished his coffee, stood up to stretch. His back hurt. Too many hours sitting. He looked at his trash can, saw the yellow notepad sticking out. He should have left it there. Let the janitor take it out with the rest of the garbage tomorrow. But something made him pull it out. Smooth the crumpled pages, read it again. This time he didn't laugh. He got up, walked to the map wall, found Rabaul, traced the supply line to Truk with his finger, 565 nautical miles, just like the kid said. Then he looked at the Admiralty Islands, 118 nautical miles from Rabaul. He pulled out the latest intelligence summary on Rabaul, checked the supply tonnage. The kid's numbers were right, 28,000 tons per month minimum. He checked the casualty projections for a Rabaul assault. The official ones. From staff officers with 20 years of experience. 30,000 to 40,000 American casualties expected. He looked at the Admiralty Islands assessment. Lightly defended. Estimated garrison 4,000 troops. Booth sat down, put the yellow notepad on his desk, read it a 3rd time. At 1:15 a.m. he started writing his own memo. Clean, professional, typed on official letterhead. He copied every number from Ezra's notepad, every calculation, every conclusion, but he didn't put Ezra's name on it. Put his own instead. He told himself it was because no admiral would listen to a 17-year-old file clerk, that the idea needed to come from someone with authority, that this was the only way to get it heard. He told himself a lot of things. By 2:30 a.m. he had a 3-page memo, official stamps, proper formatting, ready to submit up the chain of command. He put it in his outbox for Admiral Nimitz's morning briefing. Then he went home. Tuesday, December 29th, 1943. 9:45 a.m. Ezra saw the carbon copy of Booth's memo in the filing. Someone had stamped it classified and put it in the outbox for archive. He read it standing next to the filing cabinet. Read it twice. Every word was his, every number, every conclusion. But Booth's name was at the bottom. Ezra stood there for a long time. The radiator clanked. Somewhere down the hall, a typewriter clattered. Outside, sailors shouted commands during a drill. He could report it, could tell someone, could demand credit. But who would believe him, a 17-year-old file clerk against a Princeton professor, a commander with 15 years of service? And even if they believed him, what then? The memo would be discarded, the idea lost, and 680,000 Americans would die taking islands one by one. Ezra put the carbon copy back in the outbox, went back to his desk, filed papers. At least the idea was being heard. That's what mattered. Not who got credit, not who looked smart, just that someone somewhere might listen. And maybe 680,000 mothers wouldn't have to bury their sons. January 2nd, 1944, 2:00 p.m. Admiral Nimitz called a strategy review board meeting. Booth was summoned. He brought his memo. Ezra wasn't invited. File clerks didn't attend strategic planning sessions. But Booth looked nervous when he left. That was unusual. Booth never looked nervous. The meeting lasted 4 hours. Booth came back at 6:15 p.m. His face was pale. He went straight to his desk, didn't look at anyone. Ezra filed papers, waited. At 7:30 p.m. most of the office had gone home. Just Ezra and Booth and 2 other officers working late. Booth stood up, walked to Ezra's desk. "Calloway, come with me." They walked to the map room. Empty this time of night. Maps covered every wall. The Pacific stretched across them like a blue promise. Booth closed the door. Admiral Nimitz read the memo. He wants to meet the author. Ezra's throat went dry. "Sir." He asked detailed questions about the supply calculations, about the Admiralty Islands logistics, about fuel consumption rates for the Rabaul garrison. Booth looked at Ezra. "I couldn't answer them, because I didn't write it. You did." Silence. The radiator in the corner hissed. "I'm taking you to meet Nimitz tomorrow, 0800. You'll present the strategy yourself." "Sir, I don't." "You'll wear a clean uniform. You'll speak clearly. You'll answer every question truthfully. And if they ask who calculated the numbers, you'll tell them you did." Booth's voice was quiet, tired. "I'm not proud of what I did, Calloway. I should have put your name on it from the start. But I didn't. And now Nimitz wants answers I can't give." He put his hand on Ezra's shoulder, just for a moment. "Go home, get some sleep. Tomorrow you're going to have to convince 9 admirals that a hillbilly kid knows more about strategy than they do." Ezra didn't sleep that night. He lay in his bunk in the barracks, stared at the ceiling, listened to other sailors snore and mumble and dream. At 2:00 a.m. he got up, went to the bathroom, splashed water on his face, looked at himself in the mirror. Tomorrow he'd stand in front of the men who planned the entire Pacific War, men who'd graduated Annapolis, men who'd commanded fleets, men who'd forgotten more about strategy than Ezra had ever learned, and he'd tell them they were wrong. His hands started shaking again. But the numbers were right. They had to be, because if he was wrong, 680,000 American boys would die. And if he was right, but couldn't make them listen, 680,000 American boys would die anyway. Ezra went back to his bunk, lay down, stared at the ceiling until dawn. At 7:30 a.m. he put on his cleanest uniform, the one he saved for inspections. It still didn't fit right. The sleeves were still too long, but it would have to do. At 7:55 a.m. he met Commander Booth outside Strategy Room C. Booth looked at him. "You ready?" Ezra thought about his father, crushed under a mile of mountain. Thought about his mother, gone when he needed her most. Thought about his grandfather, patient hands fixing watches that would outlast them all. "No, sir, but I'm going in anyway." Booth almost smiled. That's the only kind of ready that matters. The door opened. 9 admirals waited inside. Ezra stepped through. The door to Strategy Room C clicked shut. The sound echoed in Ezra's chest like a heartbeat. 9 admirals, leather chairs, maps on every wall. Maps. The smell of coffee and cigarette smoke, thick enough to taste. Admiral Chester Nimitz sat at the head of the table, 58 years old, white hair cropped short, eyes the color of Pacific water on a cloudy day. He'd commanded the entire Pacific Fleet since 3 days after Pearl Harbor. Every ship, every plane, every life. To his right, Admiral Raymond Spruance, quiet, methodical, the man who'd won Midway. To his left, Admiral Ernest King, Chief of Naval Operations, the man who'd slammed the table 6 hours ago, who'd called Ezra a hillbilly and ordered him thrown out. King's jaw was set like concrete. His eyes tracked Ezra the way a hawk tracks a field mouse. Commander Booth stood against the wall, not sitting, not speaking, just watching. Nimitz gestured to the chair across from him. "Sit down, son." Ezra sat. The chair was too big. His feet barely touched the floor. He felt like a child at the adult table. Nimitz opened a folder, Booth's memo, the one with Ezra's numbers and Booth's name. "Commander Booth says you wrote this." "Yes, sir." "All of it?" "Yes, sir." Nimitz looked at Booth. "Commander, did you contribute anything to this analysis?" Booth's voice was steady. "No, sir. The calculations are entirely his. I adapted them into proper format." The room went quiet. Someone coughed. An ashtray scraped across wood. Admiral King leaned forward. "You're telling me this memo came from a file clerk who's been in the Navy for 8 weeks?" "Yes, sir," Booth said. King's face was turning red again. "That's the most." Nimitz raised his hand. King stopped mid-sentence. Nimitz looked at Ezra. "How old are you?" 18, sir. 3 weeks ago." "Education?" 8th grade, sir. Then I worked in the mines, got a scholarship to MIT, but was dismissed after 6 weeks." "Why were you dismissed?" Ezra met his eyes. "For questioning strategy in a way the professor considered disrespectful, sir." Something flickered across Nimitz's face. Not quite a smile. "And now you're here questioning our strategy." "Not questioning, sir. Suggesting an alternative." Admiral Spruance spoke for the first time. His voice was soft, calm. "Tell us about Rabaul." Ezra's mouth was dry. He swallowed. "Sir, Rabaul's garrison numbers over 110,000 troops across 5 operational airfields. The position is ringed by nearly 400 anti-aircraft emplacements. It's the strongest Japanese fortress south of Tokyo." "We know that," King said. "That's why we're planning to assault it." "But you don't have to, sir." The room went quiet again. Different this time. Tense, like the moment before lightning strikes. Nimitz folded his hands. "Explain." Ezra pulled papers from his pocket. The yellow notepad pages, wrinkled, stained with coffee. He smoothed them on the table. "Rabaul doesn't produce anything, sir. No food, no fuel, no ammunition. Everything comes by ship from Truk. 565 nautical miles." He traced the route with his finger on the notepad's rough map. "But the Admiralty Islands are only 118 nautical miles from Rabaul, closer than Truk. If we take the Admiralties and build an airbase there, we can cut Rabaul's supply line completely." "The Japanese will just reroute," Admiral King said. "Bring supplies through a different path." "Can't, sir. I checked every possible route. Admiralties sit at a choke point. Any ship trying to reach Rabaul has to pass within range of aircraft operating from Admiralty airfields." Spruance leaned forward. "How do you know the exact distance is 565 miles? That's very specific." "I measured it, sir. 3 times, with different map scales. Used the mnemonic projection map from survey section and verified against the Mercator chart. Calculated the Great Circle route accounting for Earth's curvature." Spruance blinked. "You know cartographic projections?" "My grandfather repaired watches, sir. He taught me precision. Said if you're off by one tooth on a gear, the whole watch fails. Strategy's the same. If the numbers are wrong, people die. Silence. The radiator in the corner hissed. Nimitz picked up Ezra's notepad. Read it. You estimate Rabaul needs 28,000 tons of supplies per month, minimum. Yes, sir. Based on garrison size and historical consumption rates from similar Japanese positions, I cross-referenced logistics reports from Guadalcanal and New Guinea. And if we cut that supply line, 6 months, sir, maybe less, the garrison becomes combat ineffective. Malaria, dysentery, malnutrition. They won't be able to mount offensive operations, won't be able to repair airfields or defend against bombing raids. They just sit there. Admiral King's chair scraped back. He stood, walked to the map wall, stared at Rabaul like he could sink it with his eyes. And the Admiralty Islands, you think they're lightly defended? Intelligence estimates 4,000 Japanese troops, sir. Maybe 4,200. Nothing like Rabaul. Casualties. Ezra hesitated. This was the number that mattered, the one that would save lives or spend them. 500 American casualties, sir. Maybe 1,000 if things go badly, compared to 30,000 to 35,000 if we assault Rabaul directly. King turned around. You're basing this on what? Hope guesswork? Math, sir. Tarawa cost us 1,696 killed for 2.4 square miles. Rabaul is 47 square miles with 46 times more defenders. The ratio holds, unless we do something different. And you think bypassing is different enough? Yes, sir, because we're not fighting their strength. We're attacking their weakness. Logistics. Nimitz set down the notepad. What about counterattack? If we take the Admiralties, Rabaul could launch a sortie, cut our supply lines to Australia. This was the moment. The question Ezra had spent 3 nights calculating. He pulled out another piece of paper. More numbers, more cramped handwriting. They won't, sir. How can you be certain? Because they don't have fuel. According to intelligence summary dated November the 15th, Rabaul's fuel reserves are at 35% of capacity. They've been burning fuel faster than it arrives since September. If they launch a major sortie destroyer's cruiser's air cover, they'll burn their remaining reserves in one operation. After that, the entire garrison is immobilized. Spruant stood up, walked to where Ezra sat, looked down at him. You read intelligence summaries marked secret. Ezra's heart hammered. Yes, sir. You're not cleared for that? No, sir. I read them anyway. King slammed his hand on the table again. That's a court-martial offense. Booth stepped forward. Sir, I gave him access. He needed the data for casualty filings. It's my responsibility. Like hell it is, King said. This kid violated security protocols and you're covering for him. Nimitz raised his hand again. The room went quiet. He looked at Ezra, really looked, like he was seeing past the too long sleeves and the Appalachian accent and the boy who didn't know how to wear a uniform. Son, do you understand what you're proposing? You're asking us to bypass the strongest Japanese position in the South Pacific, to leave 100,000 enemy troops behind our lines. If you're wrong, if Rabaul breaks out, if they attack our supply convoys, we could lose the entire Australian theatre. I understand, sir. And you still think this will work? Ezra looked at the numbers on his notepad, the calculations he'd checked 3 times, 5 times, 10 times, the math that didn't care about rank or experience or who was right. Yes, sir, the math says we can save 34,000 American lives just at Rabaul. If we apply the strategy across the Pacific WWII other fortified positions, we save hundreds of thousands more. Nimitz was quiet for a long time. 30 seconds, 40. The clock on the wall ticked. Finally, he spoke. If I approve this and you're wrong, those 34,000 lives you're trying to save will die anyway, along with thousands more when Rabaul cuts our supply lines. Yes, sir. That's a heavy burden for an 18-year-old file clerk. Yes, sir, but it's heavier for you, sir. You have to make the decision. I just have to show you the numbers. Something changed in Nimitz's eyes. Respect, maybe. Or recognition. He looked at the other admirals. Gentlemen, I want your assessment. Admiral Spruance spoke first. The mathematics are sound. I've checked them. If his supply tonnage estimates are correct, and if the Admiralties can be taken with minimal casualties, the strategy has merit. And if his estimates are wrong, King said, then we've lost 1,000 men taking islands we didn't need, and we still have to assault Rabaul anyway, but we're no worse off than we are now. Admiral King paced. His boots hit the floor like hammer strikes. This is insane. We're talking about leaving our strongest enemy position untouched, against every principle of military strategy. Not untouched, Ezra said quietly. Neutralized. King spun around. You think there's a difference? Yes, sir. Untouched means dangerous. Neutralized means irrelevant. Rabaul has 110,000 troops, but if they can't move, can't eat, can't fight, they might as well have none. King stared at him. You've got an answer for everything, don't you, kid? No, sir. Just for the math. Nimitz stood up. Everyone else stood too. Ezra scrambled to his feet. Here's what we're going to do, Nimitz said. We test it. Operation Brewer, the Admiralty Islands, February 29th. If Rabaul counterattacks, if they have the fuel and capability your numbers say they don't, then we abandon bypass strategy and go back to direct assault planning. He looked at Ezra. But if you're right, if Rabaul sits quiet and their garrison starts to wither, then we apply this strategy across the Pacific. Every fortified island, every bypassed position. We strangle Japan's defensive perimeter instead of drowning it in American blood. Ezra could barely breathe. Yes, sir. You'll accompany Commander Booth to observe the operation. You'll see firsthand if your numbers hold. If they do, you'll brief the Joint Chiefs yourself. If they don't, Nimitz didn't finish the sentence. Didn't have to. If they don't, 680,000 Americans will die, and it will be partially your fault. Dismissed. February 28, 1944, USS Phoenix, light cruiser, 40 miles off Los Negros Island. Ezra stood on the deck. The sun was setting. The sky was orange and purple and red. The ocean looked like hammered metal. Tomorrow, the 1st Cavalry Division would hit the beach, 1,026 men, reconnaissance in force, against an estimated 4,280 Japanese defenders. Commander Booth stood beside him. Neither had spoken much during the flight from Pearl Harbor. The transport plane had been loud, cold, full of Marines who looked at Ezra like he was 12 years old. Now they were here, waiting. Nervous? Booth asked. Yes, sir. Good. If you weren't, I'd think you were crazy. Ezra gripped the railing. The metal was warm from the sun. What if I'm wrong, sir? What if Rabaul has more fuel than I calculated? What if they sortie and we're not ready? Then a lot of men die, and you'll have to live with that. How do you live with it? Booth was quiet for a long time. The sun touched the horizon. The sky bled darker. You count the ones you saved, not the ones you lost. And you hope the first number is bigger than the second. Below deck, someone was playing a harmonica, a slow, sad song. Ezra didn't know the name. It sounded like mountains, like home. Sir, why did you help me? After you threw away my memo, you could have left it, could have let it die. Booth lit a cigarette. The flame from his lighter made shadows dance across his face. Because I read it again, and I realized you were smarter than me, smarter than most of the men in that room. And if I let ego kill a good idea, I'd be no better than the professor who kicked you out of MIT. He exhaled smoke. It drifted toward the darkening sky. Besides, you remind me of someone. Who, sir? Me, 30 years ago, before I learned to stop asking questions and start following orders. Ezra looked at him. Booth was staring at the horizon. His face was tired, worn down by years of war and decisions and numbers that represented lives. Do you regret it, sir? Following orders instead of asking questions? Booth was quiet. The sun disappeared. The ocean turned black. Every day, February 29th, 1944, 08:15 hours. The bombardment started at dawn. Naval guns pounded Los Negros. The sound rolled across the water like thunder. Ezra felt it in his chest, in his bones. At 08:15, the first landing craft hit the beach. Ezra watched through binoculars from the Phoenix's deck. Tiny figures running through surf, palm trees exploding, smoke rising in black columns. "Contact," someone said over the radio. "Heavy resistance at Hyann Harbor." Booth stood next to Ezra, silent, watching. The radio crackled, taking fire from bunkers on the ridge, requesting naval support. The Phoenix's guns swiveled, fired. The deck shook. Ezra's ears rang. Hours passed. The sun climbed. The heat was brutal. Ezra's uniform was soaked with sweat. "Beachhead secured," the radio said at 10:45 hours. "Advancing inland. Casualties are moderate." Moderate. That meant men were dying. How many 10, 50, 100? Ezra pulled out his notepad, started calculating. If moderate meant 50 casualties in the first 4 hours, and the operation lasted 3 days. "Stop," Booth said. Ezra looked up. "You can't count them until it's over. It'll drive you insane." "How do you not count them, sir?" "I do, but not until I have to." At 13:30 hours, the report Ezra was waiting for came over the radio. "Phoenix, this is Recon 6. No aerial activity from Rabaul. Repeat, no aerial activity. No surface contacts. Skies are clear." Booth looked at Ezra. "They're not coming." "Not yet, sir. Rabaul is 118 miles away. If they're going to sortie, it'll be in the next 6 hours, while we're still vulnerable." They waited. 1,400 hours. Nothing. 1,600 hours. Nothing. 1,900 hours. Sunset. The sky turned red again. The ocean looked like blood. Still nothing. At 2,100 hours, Booth went below deck to sleep. Ezra stayed on deck, couldn't sleep, couldn't stop watching the horizon. At 0300 hours on March 1st, he was still there. A sailor brought him coffee. Real coffee. It was hot and bitter and tasted like hope. "You waiting for something?" the sailor asked. "Yeah." "What?" "To find out if I'm a genius or a murderer." The sailor looked at him like he was crazy, walked away. At 0830 hours on March 1st, a new intelligence report arrived, decoded, translated from intercepted Japanese communications. Commander Booth brought it to Ezra on deck. "Read this." Ezra took the paper. His hands were steady now. 3 days without sleep. He was beyond shaking. The report was from Rabaul Naval Command, dated March the 1st, 0200 hours. 6 destroyers prepared for sortie to intercept enemy forces at Admiralty Islands. Sortie aborted at 0430 hours due to insufficient fuel reserves for round-trip operation, unable to guarantee return to port. All vessels ordered to remain in harbour, pending resupply. Ezra read it 3 times. They'd tried. They'd actually tried to come, to attack, to do exactly what Admiral King feared, but they couldn't because they didn't have fuel. Just like Ezra calculated. He looked at Booth. Booth was smiling. Actually smiling. "Kid, you just saved 34,000 lives." Ezra sat down on the deck. His legs wouldn't hold him anymore. "They tried," he said. "They wanted to fight, but they couldn't." "That's what makes it brilliant," Booth said. "You didn't beat them, you made them beat themselves." At 1600 hours on March 3rd, Los Negros was secured. The casualty report came in. 61 killed in action, 244 wounded, total 305 American casualties. Ezra had estimated 500 to 1,000. He'd been close, closer than anyone expected, and 34,695 American soldiers who would have died assaulting Rabaul were still alive. That night, Booth found Ezra in the mess hall. Ezra was eating beans from a can. Hadn't tasted them. Hadn't tasted anything for 3 days. "Nimitz wants you back in Pearl Harbor," Booth said. "He's implementing the bypass strategy across the entire Pacific theater. Truck, Wolei, Yap, every fortified position we don't absolutely need." "When, sir?" "Tomorrow. You'll brief the Joint Chiefs on March 15th. Ezra set down the can. "Sir, I'm 18 years old. I've been in the Navy for 4 months. They're not going to listen to me. They already are. Nimitz is pushing your strategy to MacArthur, to King, to Marshall. They're calling it island hopping, leapfrogging, a dozen different names, but it's your idea. Booth sat down across from him. You're going to be promoted, ensign probably, youngest in naval intelligence history. I don't want a promotion, sir. I just want it to work. It is working. Los Negros proved it. Now we scale it up. Save 500,000 lives, maybe more. Ezra looked at the beans, congealed, cold. What happens to Rabaul, sir, to the 110,000 Japanese there? They sit, they starve, they die, slowly, without a bullet fired. That's not honorable, sir. Booth's face hardened. War isn't about honor, Calloway. It's about math. And your math says more Americans come home alive this way. That's all that matters. But that night, lying in his bunk on the Phoenix, Ezra couldn't sleep. He kept thinking about the Japanese soldiers on Rabaul, 110,000 men, waiting for supplies that would never come, planting gardens, fishing, dying of malaria and dysentery and starvation, not shot, not bombed, just forgotten. Was that better or worse? He didn't know. At 0200 hours he got up, went to the head, splashed water on his face, looked at himself in the steel mirror. He looked older, thinner. His eyes had shadows that hadn't been there 2 weeks ago. He thought about his grandfather, the man who'd taught him precision, who'd said that if you're off by one gear tooth, the whole watch fails. Ezra had been precise. His numbers were right, but numbers didn't bleed, didn't starve, didn't sit in tunnels on a volcanic island waiting to die. He went back to his bunk, lay down, stared at the ceiling. At 0600 hours, the Phoenix turned toward Pearl Harbor. Ezra stood on deck, watched the Admiralty Islands shrink behind them, watched Rabaul in the distance, a dark smudge on the horizon, 110,000 men on that island. And every day forward, they'd get weaker, sicker, more desperate. Because of numbers, Ezra calculated in an office at 3 a.m. Booth joined him at the railing. You did good, kid. Did I, sir? You saved American lives. That's your job. What about their lives? They're the enemy. They'd kill every American on this ship if they could. I know, sir, but does that make it right? Killing them slow instead of fast? Booth was quiet for a long time. The ocean stretched out forever, blue and empty and indifferent. I don't know, Booth finally said, but I know this. War makes you choose between bad options and worse options. You chose the option that saves American boys. That's the only choice that matters. Ezra wanted to believe him. But that night in his dreams he saw 110,000 men on an island, waiting, starving, dying one day at a time, and he saw the number beside them, 34,695, the Americans who lived because those Japanese died. He didn't know which number was more important. He didn't know if anyone did. March 5th, 1944. Pearl Harbor. The heroes' welcome, Ezra expected, never came. He walked off the transport ship at 1400 hours. No band, no crowd, just Commander Booth and a staff car waiting on the dock. Nimitz wants to see you at 1600, Booth said. Clean uniform, you're being promoted. The promotion ceremony lasted 4 minutes. Admiral Nimitz's office, 3 witnesses, a pair of gold bars pinned to Ezra's collar, Ensign Ezra Calloway, 18 years old, 3 months, youngest officer in naval intelligence history. Nimitz shook his hand. Well done, Ensign. Your strategy is being implemented across the Pacific Theater. You may have saved more American lives than any other person in this war. Ezra should have felt proud, should have felt something. Instead, he just felt tired. Thank you, sir. Nimitz handed him a folder, classified, red stripe across the top. This is the implementation plan. We're bypassing Truck WWII Yap and 17 other fortified positions. Combined estimated garrison strength 290,000 Japanese troops. If your projections hold, we'll neutralize them without major combat operations. 290,000. The number sat in Ezra's stomach like a stone. Sir, what happens to them? Same as Rabaul. We cut their supply lines, they become combat ineffective. Eventually they surrender or die. How long until they surrender, sir? Nimitz's face was unreadable. Intelligence estimates 6 to 18 months depending on the garrison. Some longer. 6 to 18 months of starvation, disease, slow death. Dismissed, Ensign. March 15th, 1944. Pentagon. Washington, D.C. Ezra stood in a room with more stars than he could count. Joint Chiefs of Staff, Secretary of War, MacArthur on a telephone line from Australia. He was 19 years old. Still didn't know how to tie a tie properly. Commander Booth had fixed it for him in the car. They wanted a briefing. Wanted to understand the bypass strategy. Wanted to know how a teenager had changed the entire Pacific campaign. Ezra presented the numbers, the maps, the calculations. His voice was steady now. He'd given this briefing 6 times in the last week. To admirals, to generals, to men who commanded millions, they all asked the same questions. What about counterattacks? What about supply lines? What about the moral implications of siege warfare? Ezra had answers for the first 2. Numbers, statistics, fuel consumption rates and tonnage requirements and logistics chains. The third question he couldn't answer. General Marshall asked it directly. Ensign, you're condemning hundreds of thousands of enemy soldiers to death by starvation. How do you justify that? The room went quiet. Everyone looked at Ezra. He thought about his grandfather, about precision, about watches that ticked away the seconds of people's lives. Sir, I don't justify it. I just calculate it. My job is to save American lives. The math says this is how. And the enemy lives don't factor into your calculations. No, sir. They're the enemy. If we don't do this, they'll kill Americans. That's what enemies do. Marshall nodded slowly. That's a heavy burden for someone your age. Yes, sir, but it's lighter than telling 34,000 mothers their sons died taking Rabaul. The meeting ended at 1700 hours. The strategy was approved. Implementation would proceed across the entire Pacific Theater. MacArthur's voice crackled over the telephone before they disconnected. Ensign Calloway, you've handed me the key to the Philippines. I won't forget it. Ezra stood in the hallway afterward, marble floors, high ceilings. The building felt like a tomb. Booth found him 20 minutes later. Ezra was sitting on a bench, staring at nothing. You all right, kid? I just sentenced 290,000 men to death, sir, and everyone's congratulating me. Booth sat down beside him. You saved 500,000 Americans. That's what matters. Does it balance out 500,000 saved versus 290,000 killed? That's not how war works. There's no ledger, no cosmic accountant tallying souls. Then how does it work, sir? Booth was quiet. Down the hall, footsteps echoed. Someone laughed. The world kept turning. You do your job, you make the hard calls, and you hope you can live with yourself afterward. That night, Ezra couldn't sleep. The hotel room the Navy arranged was too quiet, too soft, too far from anything that felt real. At 0200 hours, he gave up, put on his uniform, walked the empty streets of Washington, D.C., March wind cut like a knife. He found himself at the Lincoln Memorial, climbed the steps, stood before the marble giant. Lincoln had made choices too, sent 600,000 men to their deaths, preserved the Union, freed the slaves, changed everything. Did Lincoln sleep at night, or did he count the dead? You calculating something, son? Ezra turned, an old man, security guard, black, 70, maybe older, kind eyes. Just thinking, sir. About what? Ezra looked up at Lincoln. About whether saving some people justifies killing others. The old man was quiet for a long time. Then, my grandfather was a slave. This man's war freed him. That war killed 600,000, but it freed 4 million. He looked at Ezra, saw the ensign bars, saw the shadows under his eyes. Sometimes the math is easy, son. Sometimes it ain't. But somebody's got to do it. Better it's someone who carries the weight than someone who don't feel it at all. The old man walked away. His footsteps echoed across the marble. Ezra stood alone in the cold. 600,000 dead, 4 million freed. His numbers were smaller. 87,000 dead, 500,000 saved. But the weight felt exactly the same. He walked back to the hotel as dawn broke over the capital. He didn't feel better, but he felt less alone. July 14th, 1944. Office of Naval Intelligence, Pearl Harbor. The reports came in daily now, intelligence summaries from bypassed garrisons. Ezra read them all. He couldn't stop himself. Rabaul, July 1st, 1944. Supply tonnage received 890 tons, down from 28,000. November 1943. Combat effectiveness, 41%. Disease rates, malaria, 31%. Dysentery, 19%. Dengue fever, 8%. Morale, low. Garrison engaged in vegetable cultivation for survival. Truck. July 3rd, 1944, after Operation Hailstone bombing raid, February the 17th to 18th, 250-plus aircraft destroyed 2 light cruisers, sunk 4 destroyers, sunk 32 merchant vessels sunk. Estimated casualties 4,500 killed. Remaining garrison 22,500 troops. Status isolated. No resupply since March. WWII Atoll. July 8, 1944. Garrison strength 6,426 troops. Food situation critical. Fishing supplementing diminished rations. Medical 47% suffering malnutrition-related conditions. Intercepted communication. Request immediate resupply or permission to attempt breakout. Response from Tokyo. Maintain position. Hold at all costs. Ezra kept a notebook, logged every number, every statistic, every death. It wasn't part of his job, nobody asked him to do it, but he couldn't stop. At night, he added them up. The dying men, the ones who'd surrendered to malaria or dysentery or starvation because supply ships couldn't reach them. The numbers climbed. 3,000 dead, 5,000, 8,000. Because of his strategy, because of calculations he'd made on yellow notepaper at 3 a.m. August 3rd, 1944. Medical Office, Pearl Harbor. Ezra reported for his 6-month physical, required for all officers. Dr. Margaret Chen ran Navy's psychiatric evaluations. 42, sharp, saw everything. Ensign Calloway, how are you sleeping? Fine, ma'am. Your bunkmates say you walk the base at 0300 every night. Ezra said nothing. Dr. Chen set down her clipboard. You've lost 16 pounds since March. Your hands shake. You're reading casualty reports outside your assignment scope. She leaned forward. I'm not pulling you from duty. You're not a danger. But you're carrying something that's crushing you. I'm fine, ma'am. No, you're 19, and you've killed more enemy soldiers than most generals. Not with bullets, with mathematics. That's a different weight. Her voice softened. The Navy trained you to calculate casualties. Nobody trained you to carry them. That's what they always forget. Ezra's throat tightened. How do I carry them, ma'am? You don't. Not all of them. You choose which ones to remember, the rest you let go. Or they drown you. She signed his clearance. Fit for duty, Ensign, but my door's open if you need it. Not an order, an offer. Ezra never took her up on it, but he thought about her words for 40 years. You choose which ones to remember. July 19th, 1944. Admiral King's office. Ezra was summoned at 0900 hours. No explanation, just a note. Report to Admiral King immediately. He walked across the base. The Hawaiian sun was brutal. His uniform was already soaked with sweat by the time he arrived. King's secretary waved him in. He's expecting you. Admiral King stood by the window, looking out at the harbor. at the ships that represented American power. He didn't turn around when Ezra entered. "Ensign Calloway." "Sir, I owe you an apology." Ezra blinked. "Sir." King turned. His face was different. Softer, somehow. Older. "In January, I called you a hillbilly, ordered you thrown out of a strategy meeting, said you were wasting our time. I remember, sir. I was wrong." King walked to his desk, picked up a photograph, held it so Ezra could see. A young man in marine dress blues, 22, maybe 23, same jaw as King, same eyes. "My son, Lieutenant Thomas King, 2nd Battalion, 5th Marines." "Sir, He was supposed to assault, truck, direct invasion, March 1944. We had it all planned, naval bombardment, marine landing, take the island garrison by garrison." King set down the photograph. His hand was shaking. "Your strategy changed that. We bypassed truck instead, bombed it to hell but didn't invade. My son never set foot on that island, never faced those bunkers, never walked into machine gun fire." King looked at Ezra. His eyes were wet. "He's alive because of you, because an 18-year-old file clerk asked a question nobody else thought to ask." He extended his hand. Ezra shook it. King's grip was tight, desperate, the grip of a father who almost lost his son. "Thank you, Ensign, for giving me my boy back." King released his hand, turned back to the window. "Dismissed." Ezra walked out of the office, down the hall, out into the brutal Hawaiian sun. He made it to the bathroom before he started crying. He didn't know why. Relief, maybe. Or gratitude. Or the weight of knowing that his numbers had saved this one specific life, this one son, this one father's heart. He washed his face, looked at himself in the mirror, 19 years old, ensign's bars on his collar, shadows under his eyes from too many nights reading casualty reports. He'd saved Lieutenant Thomas King. But how many Japanese sons had he killed? How many fathers on those bypassed islands were grieving? The numbers didn't distinguish, American or Japanese, father or son. The math was the same. But somehow, it wasn't. August 9th, 1945, 0200 hours. Ezra sat alone in intelligence analysis. Everyone else had gone home, or to bars, or to celebrate. Japan had surrendered. The war was over. 2 atomic bombs, Hiroshima, Nagasaki, and then silence. Then the Emperor's voice on the radio announcing the unthinkable. The war was over. Ezra should have been celebrating, should have been drinking with the others, kissing nurses in the street like they were doing in Times Square. Instead, he was reading reports, the final tallies from the bypassed garrisons. Rabaul Peak Garrison, strength 110,000 troops, November 1943. Surrendered alive, 69,300, August 1945. Casualties, 40,700 total. Breakdown, combat deaths, 8,200. Disease, 18,500. Starvation/malnutrition, 14,000. Truck, initial garrison, 27,000 troops. Surrendered, 21,300 alive. Total dead, 5,700. WWII, initial garrison, 6. 426 troops. Surrendered, 1,650 alive. Total dead, 4,776. Ezra's hand shook as he wrote the totals. Across all bypassed positions, 290,000 initial garrison strength. Approximately 87,000 dead from disease and starvation. 87,000 men. He hadn't shot them, hadn't dropped bombs on them, hadn't bayoneted them in jungle combat. He'd just removed them from the equation, cut their supply lines, let time and biology do the work. Was that better, more humane? Or was it crueler, slower? He pulled out his other notebook, the one where he tracked American casualties saved, estimated US casualties if direct assault strategy had been used 540,000 to 680,000. Actual US casualties using bypass strategy, 38,000 to 42,000 combat deaths across bypassed operations. Savings approximately 500,000 to 640,000 American lives. 500,000 Americans lived. 87,000 Japanese died slow deaths. The numbers should have made him feel vindicated. Proud. He'd done exactly what he was supposed to do. Saved American lives. But all he felt was hollow. Commander Booth found him at 0400 hours. Ezra hadn't moved, hadn't closed the notebooks. "Kid, war's over. Why aren't you celebrating?" Ezra looked up. His eyes were dry. He was beyond crying. "I'm adding up what it cost." Booth sat down, looked at the notebooks, the tallies, the numbers, in 2 columns. Saved, killed. "You did your job, Ez. Better than anyone could have hoped." "I killed 87,000 men by starving them, Nate. That was my job." It was the first time he'd called Booth by his first name. Booth didn't correct him. "You saved 500,000 Americans. That was also your job." Does it balance? Does saving 500,000 make up for killing 87,000? That's not the right question. What is? Booth was quiet. Outside, someone set off fireworks. Celebration, joy. The war was over. The right question is, if you had to do it again knowing everything you know now, would you? Ezra closed his eyes. Saw Lieutenant Thomas King, alive. Saw 500,000 American boys coming home to their mothers. Saw ticker tape parades and weddings and children who'd grow up with fathers. Then he saw 87,000 Japanese soldiers dying in tunnels, in gardens they'd planted, on islands they couldn't leave. "I don't know," he whispered. "I don't know if I could." "That's the answer of someone with a conscience," Booth said. "Hold on to that. Don't let this war make you into someone who doesn't question the cost." October 12, 1945. Discharge papers. The war was over. The Navy didn't need teenage strategists anymore. Ezra was offered a commission, a path to Annapolis, a career in naval intelligence. He declined. "Why?" Nimitz asked when Ezra turned it down. "You have a gift for this. You could revolutionize military strategy." "I think I've done enough revolutionizing, sir." "Where will you go?" "Home, sir. West Virginia. I'm going to finish high school, maybe go to college." "Doing what?" "Teaching, I think. Mathematics. Something where the numbers don't represent lives." Nimitz shook his hand. "The Navy owes you a debt it can never repay, Ensign Calloway. You saved more American lives than any weapon we built, more than any battle we won." "Did I, sir, or did I just kill differently?" Nimitz had no answer. October 15th, 1945. Train to West Virginia. Ezra sat by the window, watched America pass by. Cities, farms, mountains rising in the distance. He was 19 years old. He'd been in the Navy for 23 months. In that time, he'd changed the course of a war, saved hundreds of thousands of lives, been promoted faster than anyone in history. And he felt empty. The train stopped in small towns. People got on and off, soldiers coming home, sailors, Marines, all of them smiling, laughing, alive. Alive because of strategy, because of logistics, because someone somewhere made calculations that saved them, maybe because of Ezra's calculations specifically. He'd never know. And that was almost worse than knowing. November the 3rd, 1945. Morgantown, West Virginia. Ezra stepped off the train at 1600 hours. The station was small, wooden. Nothing like Pearl Harbor or D.C. No one was there to meet him. He hadn't told anyone he was coming. He walked through town, past the mine where his father died, past the church where his grandfather's funeral had been, past the school he'd left at 14 to work in the mines. He stopped at the cemetery, found his grandfather's grave. The headstone was simple, just a name and dates. Ezra sat down next to it. The grass was cold. October in the mountains. I did what you taught me, Grandad. I was precise. I checked my numbers 3 times, 5 times, 10 times. Every gear fit exactly where it should. The wind blew through the trees, the leaves fell like snow. But you never told me what to do when being right feels like being wrong. He stayed there until sunset, until the groundskeeper came to lock the gates. Then he walked to the address Booth had given him. A boarding house, room and board for $12 a week. The landlady looked at his uniform. You just back? Yes, ma'am. Pacific? Yes, ma'am. Welcome home, son. First week's free, for what you did over there. Ezra wanted to tell her he didn't deserve it, that he'd killed 87,000 men by starvation, that he wasn't a hero, but she was smiling, genuine, kind. Thank you, ma'am. He went to his room. 3rd floor, small. A bed, a desk, a window overlooking Main Street. He unpacked his duffel. 3 uniforms, 2 notebooks, the yellow notepad with his original calculations. He looked at those numbers, the ones that had changed everything. 34,500 American lives saved at Rabaul alone. He should burn it, throw it away, forget. But he couldn't, because 34,500 mothers had sons who came home, and they'd never know that a kid from Appalachia with a pencil had saved them. That had to mean something. It had to. December 1945, West Virginia University. Ezra enrolled under the GI Bill, mathematics major. He was 19. Most of his classmates were veterans too, older, harder, men who'd seen things they'd never talk about. He fit right in. The math came easy. Calculus, differential equations, number theory, problems that had solutions, clear, definitive, provable solutions. Not like war, not like strategy, not like questions about whether saving 500,000 lives justified killing 87,000. His professor noticed. Dr. Harold Winters, 62 years old, had taught at Princeton before the war. Mr. Calloway, you have an unusual aptitude for logistics and optimization problems. Thank you, sir. Where did you serve, sir? Naval Intelligence, sir. Pacific Theater. Doing what? Strategic analysis, sir. Dr. Winters looked at him over his glasses. You're being modest. I know who you are. Ezra froze. Sir, the bypass strategy, island hopping. I consulted on some of the mathematical models the Navy used to evaluate it. Your name was in the classified reports, redacted, but I recognized the calculations. Ezra didn't know what to say. You saved more lives with mathematics than most men save with rifles, Dr. Winters said. You should be proud. I'm trying to be, sir. But you're not. No, sir. Why? Ezra thought about it. About 87,000 dead. About nights he couldn't sleep. Because the numbers I saved were people, but so were the numbers I killed. And I don't know how to reconcile that. Dr. Winters was quiet for a long time. Outside, students laughed. Snowball fight. The innocence of people who'd never had to calculate the cost of survival. Mathematics doesn't have a conscience, Mr. Calloway. That's why we need mathematicians who do. June 1947, letter from Commander Booth. It arrived on a Tuesday. Ezra almost didn't open it. He and Booth exchanged letters every few months. Updates. How are you? I'm fine. The surface-level correspondence of men who'd shared something too heavy to talk about directly. But this letter was different. I've recommended you for the Legion of Merit 3 times. All 3 recommendations have been denied. The bypass strategy remains classified top secret. The powers that be don't want the world knowing that we won by starving enemies instead of fighting them. I'm sorry, you deserve recognition. You deserve to have your name in history books next to Nimitz and MacArthur. But maybe it's better this way. Maybe you get to be normal, get to teach your students and fix radios and live a life that doesn't involve calculating how many men will die. I think about Rabaul sometimes, about the choice we made, the lives we saved and the lives we took. I don't know if it was right, but I know it was necessary. That's the burden we carry, you and me. We did what had to be done, and we live with it. Your friend Nathaniel Ezra read the letter 3 times.
Then he wrote back, "Nate, I don't need medals. I just need to know that it mattered, that 500,000 men came home because of numbers I wrote on yellow paper. If that's true, then I can live with the rest." Ez. He mailed it that afternoon. He never received a reply. Weeks passed.
Then months. Ezra assumed Booth was busy. Retired commanders had consulting work, advisory boards. In November 1947, a different letter arrived from Helen Booth. "Dear Ezra Nathaniel asked me to write if anything happened. He had a heart attack in September. Serious. But he's survived. He's home now, recovering. He wanted you to know your letter meant everything. He keeps it on his nightstand, reads it when the doubts get loud. Thank you for forgiving him. It's given him peace." Helen Booth Ezra kept Booth's last letter in his desk drawer. Read it sometimes when the doubts got too loud. "We did what had to be done." He hoped that was true. September 1950, teaching. Ezra got a job at Morgantown High School, mathematics and physics, 24 years old, the youngest teacher in the school. His students didn't know what he'd done in the war, didn't know that he'd changed the course of the Pacific campaign, didn't know about Rabaul or Truk or the 500,000 lives saved. They just knew he was good at explaining quadratic equations and orbital mechanics. That was enough. One student asked him once, "Mr. Calloway, what did you do in the war?" "I worked with numbers," he said. "Like accounting." Something like that. He didn't tell them about the other numbers, the ones that still haunted him. 87,000, 40,700, 14,000 dead from starvation. Those weren't numbers for children. April 1965. Declassification. The letter came from the Department of Defense. Operation Cartwheel documents were being declassified. 20 years after the war's end. Ezra's name appeared on page 247. A footnote, initial strategic concept for bypass operations proposed by Ensign E. Calloway, December 1943. Concept evaluated and refined by strategic planning staff, implemented February 1944. A footnote, 6 lines, 20 years late. Ezra read it in his living room. He was 39 years old, still teaching, still living in Morgantown, had never married, had never left West Virginia after coming home. He should have felt vindicated, finally recognition, finally his name in the record, but all he felt was tired. The war was 20 years ago. The men he'd saved were 40 years old now, had families, careers, lives they'd built because they didn't die on a beach somewhere, and the men he'd killed were gone. Dust, bones on forgotten islands. History would remember the victory, would remember Nimitz and MacArthur and the island-hopping campaign. But would it remember the cost, the 87,000 who died slow deaths because supply ships stopped coming? Probably not. History didn't care about footnotes. June 1968. Visitor. Ezra was in his garage. He'd bought a house in 1955. Small, 2 bedrooms, a garage where he fixed things, radios, televisions, watches like his grandfather, precision work, every component exact. If one gear was off, the whole system failed. A car pulled up, black sedan, official looking. An old man got out. White hair, cane, moving slow. It took Ezra a moment to recognize him. "Nate." Nathaniel Booth smiled. "Hello, Ez." They embraced. 2 old men who'd been young once, who'd made decisions that saved and killed hundreds of thousands. "I thought you might be gone," Ezra said. Helen's letter said the heart attack was serious. Had 4 of them since then, actually. This old heart keeps ticking despite its best efforts to stop. They sat in Ezra's garage, drank coffee. Booth looked around at the workbenches, the half-fixed radios, the television with its guts exposed. "You could have been an admiral, you know. Revolutionized naval strategy, changed how wars are fought." "I did change how wars are fought," Ezra said quietly. That was enough. "Any regrets?" Ezra thought about it, really thought. Every day, but I'd do it again. Because Lieutenant King came home, because 500,000 others came home, that has to count for something. And the ones who didn't, the Japanese on those islands, I think about them too. Wonder if there was another way, a better way. Was there? I don't know, Nate. Maybe that's the answer. Maybe there wasn't a good choice, just a less terrible one. Booth nodded. I came to apologize for taking credit for your idea at the start, for putting my name on your memo.
Ancient history. Maybe, but I've been carrying it for 25 years, needed to say it before I die. You're not dying. We're all dying, Ez. Some of us just know the timeline better than others. They sat in silence. Two men who'd calculated the cost of victory and learned to live with the sum. Thank you, Booth finally said, for forgiving an old man's pride. Thank you for making sure the idea got heard, even if your name was on it first. Booth left at sunset.
Ezra never saw him again. Booth died in 1970, heart attack number 5, fatal, March 1983. The letter. It came from California, return address. Ezra didn't recognize. Dear Mr. Calloway, you don't know me. My name is William King. I'm 41 years old. I teach history at UCLA. My father was Lieutenant Thomas King, USMC. He died in 1979. But before he died, he told me a story about a young ensign named Ezra Calloway who'd changed the Pacific strategy, who'd saved his life by asking a question no one else thought to ask. My father said he was supposed to assault Truk, that he would have died on those beaches. But the strategy changed. The island was bypassed. I exist because of you. My children exist because of you. My father got to live 49 years. He wouldn't have had if you hadn't done the math. I know this is strange, getting a letter from a stranger. But I needed you to know that your numbers weren't just numbers. They were my father's life, my children's lives. Thank you for giving us a chance to exist. William King Ezra read the letter sitting at his kitchen table. He was 57 years old. His hands shook as he held the paper. Lieutenant Thomas King had lived, had a son, grandchildren, because of numbers on yellow paper, because Ezra asked, what if? He put the letter in his desk drawer, next to Booth's last letter, next to the original yellow notepad with the Rabaul calculations. His archive, the proof that it had mattered. That night, he slept better than he had in years. August 15th, 1994. Ezra was in his garage, fixing a watch, delicate work. His hands weren't as steady as they used to be. 68 years old, arthritis, high blood pressure, the costs of living. He felt the pain in his chest at 3:47 p.m. Sharp. Radiating down his left arm. Heart attack. He sat down on his workbench stool. The watch ticked in his hand. Precise. Perfect. Every gear exactly where it should be. He thought about his life, about the war, about the numbers, 500,000 saved, 87,000 killed. William King's children who existed because of math. 40,700 Japanese who died on Rabaul because of the same math. The watch ticked. His heart struggled. The garage smelled like oil and solder and old wood. He thought about his grandfather, about precision, about watches that outlasted the men who fixed them. Had he been precise enough? Had his calculations saved the right people, killed the right enemies, or was there no right answer, just choices and consequences and the hope that the good outweighed the bad? The watch ticked. His heart stopped at 3:52 p.m. The funeral was held on August 18th, 1994. 340 people attended. Former students, neighbors, people whose radios he'd fixed, whose televisions he'd repaired, and 4 Navy veterans, old men now, who'd tracked Ezra down through military records, who'd served on ships that never had to assault Rabaul or Truk or any of the islands his strategy had bypassed. They stood at attention as the casket was lowered, saluted a man who'd saved their lives with mathematics. One of them placed a yellow notepad on the casket, a replica of the original, with numbers written in careful script. 34,500 lives saved at Rabaul, 500,000 lives saved across the Pacific. One genius from Appalachia who asked, what if November 2002, Naval War College, the curriculum added a new course, Callaway's bypass strategy logistics as warfare. Students learned about the 18-year-old file clerk who'd revolutionized Pacific strategy, who'd saved more lives with calculations than most commanders saved with entire fleets. The case study was taught at West Point, at Annapolis, at every military academy in America. Ezra's name entered the textbooks. No longer a footnote, a chapter. April 2015, Norfolk, Virginia. The USS Callaway was commissioned, DDG-117, Arleigh Burke class destroyer, state-of-the-art, bristling with missiles and radar and the most sophisticated technology the Navy could build, named for a boy from West Virginia who'd won a war with a pencil. The christening speech was given by Admiral Patricia Henderson, Chief of Naval Operations. Ensign Ezra Callaway asked a simple question that changed history. What if we don't fight? What if we bypass their strength and attack their weakness? What if we make them defeat themselves? He was 18 years old, a file clerk, a kid who'd been kicked out of MIT for asking too many questions. But he asked the right question, and 500,000 American servicemen came home because of it. She paused, looked at the crowd, veterans, families, sailors in dress whites. Callaway's story teaches us that the quietest voices sometimes solve the loudest problems. That genius doesn't care about age or rank, or whether you fit the uniform properly, it just cares about being right. So as this ship bears his name into the future, remember what he taught us. Question everything, calculate precisely, and never assume the old way is the only way. The bottle broke against the hull. Champagne foamed and ran down the steel. USS Callaway, DDG-117, carrying a name into the future, a name that meant precision, mathematics, the courage to ask what if. Ezra Callaway died believing he'd made a choice, saved 500,000, killed 87,000. But the math didn't end there. The 500,000 who came home had children, 1.2 million children. Those children had children. 2.8 million grandchildren. By 2024, Ezra's calculations had resulted in approximately 8 million Americans who existed because their grandfather or great-grandfather or great-great-grandfather didn't die on a Pacific beach. 8 million lives. From one question asked at 3 a.m. on yellow notepaper. That's the mathematics of genius. That's the price of asking what if. And that's why history remembers not the footnotes but the question. The quiet voice from Appalachia who changed everything by refusing to accept that the hard way was the only way. 500,000 men came home because a boy asked a question and had the courage to believe his own math.